For thousands of years, ice covered vast regions of Earth. Entire landscapes lay buried beneath frozen walls stretching to the horizon. Then slowly the world began to change. This is the story of the first humans who witnessed the end of the Ice Age. People who watched glaciers retreat, rivers awaken, forests spread across empty land, and entire ecosystems transform before their eyes. They lived through one of the greatest environmental changes in human history, a turning point that reshaped the future of our species forever. But what was it actually like to stand at the edge of a melting world? How did these ancient people survive, adapt, and build new lives as the planet transformed around them? Before we journey back more than 10,000 years into this lost chapter of human history, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more fascinating stories from humanity's distant past. Now let's travel to the final days of the Ice Age and meet the first witnesses to a world being reborn. The world appears frozen in place. Across enormous stretches of the northern hemisphere, walls of ice rise beyond the horizon, gleaming beneath pale sunlight that rarely brings warmth. Winds sweep across open plains where almost no trees grow. Dust drifts through the air during long dry seasons. Herds of animals move across grasslands that seem endless, and small bands of humans follow them through a landscape unlike anything familiar today. To those people, this is not a temporary age. It is simply the world. A traveller standing on the Great Mammoth Steppe, roughly 12,000 years before the present, would witness a continent-sized wilderness stretching from Western Europe across northern Asia and into the lands that now lie beneath the waters of the Bering Strait. In many places, summers remain short and cool. Winters are long and severe. The largest ice sheets on Earth still cover enormous portions of North America and Northern Europe. Some glaciers reach thicknesses measured not in meters but in kilometers. Entire mountain ranges disappear beneath ice. Yet despite the harshness, this is not an empty world. Humans have already spread across much of the globe. They have survived droughts, volcanic eruptions, shifting climates, and encounters with other human species. By this point, Neanderthals have vanished. Other ancient human relatives have disappeared as well. Homo sapiens stands alone, but survival has never been guaranteed. The people living near the end of the Ice Age inhabit a planet that still carries the marks of deep cold. Sea levels remain dramatically lower than they are today. Vast coastal plains exist where oceans will someday stand. Britain remains connected to mainland Europe by dry land. Southeast Asia forms a much larger connected landscape than modern maps suggest. The area between Siberia and Alaska is not a strait at all, but a broad land bridge known today as Beringia. Entire worlds exist that later generations will never see. Across these exposed lands, animals thrive in numbers difficult to imagine now. Woolly mammoths roam grasslands alongside bison horses, musk oxen, reindeer, and giant deer. In some regions, predators such as cave lions and wolves follow the herds. Human communities learn every movement of these animals. Their lives depend on understanding migration routes, weather patterns, and seasonal changes with extraordinary precision. For many groups, knowledge serves as a form of survival equal to any weapon. A successful hunter must understand where herds gather after winter storms. Families must know where rivers remain unfrozen. Communities pass information through generations, creating mental maps of landscapes that stretch hundreds of kilometers. Every valley, water source, and migration corridor carries importance. The evidence that survives in the archaeological record suggests remarkable adaptability. People construct clothing from animal hides designed for extreme cold. They build shelters suited to harsh environments. In some places, mammoth bones become structural materials for homes. Fires provide warmth, light, and protection, but fuel often remains scarce in treeless regions. Survival requires constant adjustment. Modern observers sometimes imagine Ice Age people as primitive wanderers struggling against nature. The reality appears far more complex. These communities possess deep environmental knowledge. They create tools of remarkable sophistication. They produce art ornaments, carvings, and symbolic objects that reveal rich cultural lives. Some leave paintings deep inside caves. Others carve animals from ivory with astonishing detail. Even in a world dominated by ice, beauty matters. Yet beneath the apparent stability of this frozen age, something enormous is beginning. Far to the south of the greatest glaciers, temperatures fluctuate in subtle ways. Small changes occur in atmospheric circulation. Seasonal patterns shift almost imperceptibly. At first, no human could possibly recognize the significance. A slightly warmer summer, a glacier retreating a short distance, a growing season extending by a few days. Such changes seem insignificant within a single lifetime, but Earth operates on scales larger than individual experience. The end of the last ice age does not arrive as a single event. It unfolds across centuries and millennia. The process begins long before anyone can recognize its destination. Variations in Earth's orbit alter how sunlight reaches different regions. Massive climate systems respond. Ice that has dominated the landscape for thousands of years begins a slow retreat. At first, the transformation remains almost invisible. A hunter returning to a familiar valley may notice more vegetation than previous generations described. Another community might observe animals arriving earlier in spring. Lakes form where ice once stood. Rivers change course. Wetlands expand. These observations seem local. No one can see the entire planet. That limitation shapes the human experience of the Ice Age's end. Modern science reconstructs global patterns using ice cores, sediment layers, fossils, and countless other forms of evidence. The people living through these events possess no such overview. They experience change through weather animal behavior, food availability, and shifting landscapes. For them, climate is not a graph. It is daily life. A particularly harsh winter can mean hunger. An unexpected migration can determine whether a community thrives or struggles. A newly formed river may create opportunities or barriers. Every environmental change carries consequences. The great ice sheets themselves influence weather across enormous distances. Their presence shapes atmospheric circulation and redirects storms. As they gradually shrink, entire climate systems begin reorganizing. The effects spread outward through continents and oceans. The world is starting to move. What makes this moment so extraordinary is that it represents one of the most profound environmental transitions ever witnessed by human beings. Earlier humans experienced climate shifts as well, some of them severe. But the generations living near the end of the Ice Age occupy a unique position. They stand at the threshold between two fundamentally different worlds. Behind them lies the ancient realm of mammoths, vast tundra grasslands, and continental glaciers. Ahead lies the warmer Holocene epoch, the age in which agriculture, cities, kingdoms, empires, and eventually modern civilization will emerge. The people themselves cannot know this. They wake each morning concerned with immediate realities: food, shelter, family, survival. Yet unknowingly they are becoming witnesses to one of the greatest transformations in human history. The landscape around them is beginning to change. The ice that once seemed eternal is losing its grip. Coastlines will move, forests will spread, animals will disappear, entire regions will be reshaped. Some lands will drown beneath rising seas. Others will emerge from beneath retreating glaciers for the first time in tens of thousands of years. What follows is not merely a climatic event. It is the remaking of a planet. And the first humans to witness that remaking are already walking across the cold grasslands of the late Ice Age, unaware that the ancient world around them is approaching its final chapter. The people living along the frozen frontiers of the late Ice Age occupy one of the most demanding environments humanity has ever mastered. Their world is neither entirely buried beneath glaciers nor comfortably distant from them. Instead, they exist in the vast transitional zone between ice and open land, where survival depends upon reading the landscape with extraordinary accuracy. Every season brings opportunities and dangers. Every movement across the horizon carries meaning. To understand these communities, it is necessary to imagine a landscape unlike most places on Earth today. The Great Mammoth Steppe stretches across enormous distances. Despite the cold, much of it is not covered by deep snow year-round. Low precipitation leaves many regions surprisingly dry. Grasslands, herbs, sedges, and hardy flowering plants cover broad plains. During the brief summers, sunlight can linger for long hours, producing bursts of biological activity. Plants grow rapidly. Insects emerge. Herds spread across the land to take advantage of the season's abundance. Then winter returns. Temperatures plunge. Rivers freeze. Winds sweep across open ground with little resistance. The environment becomes unforgiving once more. Yet human communities adapt remarkably well. Archaeological discoveries reveal populations that understand their surroundings in ways modern observers often underestimate. They do not merely survive the Ice Age. In many places they flourish within it. Groups move strategically through territories shaped by seasonal cycles. Camps appear near rivers during certain times of year, and near migration corridors during others. Resources are used efficiently because waste can mean disaster. What survives in the archaeological record suggests highly organized patterns of movement. These are not random wanderers drifting through wilderness. They possess detailed knowledge of enormous landscapes. Generations accumulate observations regarding animal behavior, weather shifts, water sources, and safe travel routes. Information becomes one of the most valuable resources available. A hunter tracking reindeer across frozen ground is doing far more than following footprints. He is interpreting a complex environmental puzzle. Wind direction influences scent. Snow conditions affect movement. River crossings change with the season. The behavior of one herd may predict the location of another. Success depends on attention. Failure can mean hunger. The animals themselves form the foundation of life. Reindeer provide meat, hides, antlers, and bone. Horses and bison offer similar resources. Mammoths supply extraordinary quantities of material. A single successful mammoth hunt can support an entire community for extended periods. Mammoth bones become construction materials. Ivory becomes tools, ornaments, and art. Fat becomes fuel. The relationship between humans and these animals shapes nearly every aspect of existence. Yet hunting large animals remains dangerous. Evidence suggests cooperation plays a critical role. Groups work together to track, surround, and process prey. Such efforts require planning, communication, and social bonds extending beyond immediate families. The Ice Age frontier rewards cooperation. This becomes increasingly important because environmental conditions are never entirely predictable. A severe winter may reduce animal populations in one area. A sudden storm may disrupt migration routes. Communities that maintain wider social networks often possess greater resilience when local conditions deteriorate. Archaeologists have found indications of long-distance connections extending hundreds of kilometers. Materials sometimes travel remarkable distances. Decorative objects appear far from their sources. These patterns suggest that even in a harsh and sparsely populated world, people maintain relationships across large regions. Such connections may serve practical purposes as much as cultural ones. Knowledge spreads through these networks. News of changing conditions likely moves with travelers. Information about hunting grounds, unusual weather, or newly accessible routes could prove invaluable. Although no written records exist, information itself, functions almost like a survival technology. Meanwhile, daily life continues beneath the shadow of the glaciers. The ice sheets dominate the northern horizons in many regions. They are not simply large mountains of ice, but continent-sized systems exerting influence over weather, rivers, and ecosystems. Meltwater streams emerge from their margins during warmer months. Cold air flows outward from them. Their sheer presence alters atmospheric circulation. For generations they seem permanent. Children grow up seeing the same distant walls of ice their grandparents described. Stories pass from one generation to the next. Seasonal routines become established. Entire cultures evolve around environmental patterns that appear stable. But stability can be deceptive. By roughly 15,000 years ago, major climatic changes are already underway in parts of the world. Temperatures begin rising in many regions. Glaciers respond. Ice margins retreat. Vegetation patterns shift. Water systems reorganize. These changes rarely occur smoothly. Some decades bring rapid warming. Others bring reversals. Scholars still debate the precise timing and regional variations of many transitions because the evidence remains complex. Climate operates differently across continents, and local experiences often vary significantly. To the people living through these events, change likely appears uneven and confusing. One valley becomes greener, another remains unchanged. A hunting route used for generations suddenly produces fewer animals. A new wetland forms where dry ground once existed. No single explanation fully accounts for every local experience because environmental transformation unfolds differently from place to place. Yet certain patterns emerge. As temperatures rise, some species begin expanding into new territory. Shrubs and trees gradually move northward in regions where conditions allow. Forest edges advance. Open grasslands shrink in some areas. The animals adapted to cold, open environments face increasing pressure. Human communities notice these developments long before anyone understands their larger causes. They observe consequences rather than mechanisms. This distinction matters. Modern science explains climate change through orbital variations, atmospheric feedbacks, ocean circulation, and interactions between ice sheets and global systems. Ice Age hunters possess none of this framework. Instead, they encounter changes directly. A familiar landscape no longer behaves as expected. Seasonal rhythms become less reliable. The certainty of inherited knowledge begins to erode. For societies dependent upon environmental predictability, this creates profound challenges. Yet adaptation remains one of humanity's greatest strengths. Archaeological evidence reveals repeated adjustments in technology, mobility, and resource use. Communities alter hunting strategies. They exploit different species. They expand into newly available territories. Innovation emerges not from comfort but from necessity. The frozen frontier is teaching a lesson humanity will learn again and again throughout history. No environment remains fixed forever. Even the seemingly eternal glaciers are vulnerable to forces operating across vast stretches of time. As the generations pass, subtle changes accumulate. Ice retreats farther, rivers grow stronger, summers lengthen, new plants appear, animal populations shift. The ancient world remains recognizable, but its foundations are beginning to move. The people following mammoths and reindeer across the cold plains cannot yet know how dramatic the transformation will become. They cannot foresee the disappearance of entire landscapes or the flooding of lands where future oceans will rise. They cannot imagine forests spreading across territories that have remained open for thousands of years. What they do know is simpler. The world their ancestors understood is changing, and the first signs are already visible along the frozen frontier where humans and glaciers have lived side by side for countless generations. For thousands of years, the rhythms of the Ice Age seem dependable. Winters arrive with familiar severity. Summers bring brief periods of growth. Animal migrations follow routes learned across generations. The great ice sheets dominate the north. Entire cultures organize themselves around these patterns, passing environmental knowledge from parents to children, with the assumption that the world tomorrow will resemble the world today. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, that assumption begins to fail. The first humans to witness the end of the Ice Age do not wake one morning to discover a warmer planet. No dramatic announcement marks the beginning of the transition. There is no single year that clearly separates the old world from the new. Instead, change arrives in fragments scattered across decades and centuries, accumulating so gradually that few individuals can grasp its full significance. A hunter notices that a river remains unfrozen slightly longer than it once did. An elder recalls winters that seemed harsher in youth. A familiar valley supports thicker vegetation than previous generations remember. None of these observations appears extraordinary by itself. Together, however, they signal the beginning of one of the most important environmental transformations in human history. Modern scientists understand that the climate system emerging from the last ice age responds to a complex combination of factors. Variations in Earth's orbit alter the distribution of solar energy, reaching different latitudes. These subtle changes trigger powerful feedbacks involving ice sheets, oceans, vegetation, and the atmosphere itself. The planet does not warm evenly. Different regions respond at different times and at different speeds. What survives in the geological record reveals a world entering a period of remarkable instability. Ice cores extracted from Greenland preserve tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere, offering a detailed archive of climatic conditions. These records show that temperatures sometimes change with surprising speed. In some periods, dramatic warming occurs over spans far shorter than earlier scientists once believed possible. Entire climate systems can reorganize within a few human generations. For the people living through such events, the consequences unfold not in laboratories or scientific graphs, but across the landscapes they depend upon. The changes begin affecting plants first. Long before humans recognize broader climatic trends, ecosystems start responding. Certain species expand into territories where they previously struggled to survive. Shrubs spread across open ground. In some regions, small clusters of trees appear where none existed for centuries. Wetlands form in depressions created by melting ice. Lakes enlarge as water accumulates across newly thawed terrain. These developments may initially seem beneficial. More vegetation often means more grazing opportunities for herbivores. Animal populations sometimes increase. Water becomes more abundant in areas that were once dry. Newly productive environments attract wildlife and with them human communities. But environmental systems rarely change in isolation. As some species prosper, others encounter growing difficulties. The mammoth steppe that once stretched across enormous portions of Eurasia and North America depends upon a delicate combination of cold temperatures, dry conditions, and open landscapes. As warming progresses, that balance begins to shift. Forests slowly advance into former grasslands. Moisture levels increase in some regions. Habitats that supported Ice Age megafauna start fragmenting. The transformation remains gradual enough that most individuals experience only pieces of it. A child born during one century may inherit a landscape noticeably different from the one known by grandparents, yet still familiar enough to seem continuous. Human perception excels at adapting to gradual change. This adaptability helps people survive, but can also make long-term transformations difficult to recognize. Generation by generation, the world is being rewritten. One of the most striking aspects of the Ice Age's ending is that humans occupy a unique observational position. Earlier species experience major climatic transitions, but they leave little direct evidence of how they responded. The people living at the close of the last Ice Age, by contrast, leave tools, campsites, artwork, hunting remains and traces of movement that allow modern researchers to reconstruct parts of their story. The evidence remains incomplete, but patterns emerge. Communities begin appearing in areas previously dominated by glacial conditions. As ice retreats, newly exposed landscapes become available for exploration. Valleys hidden beneath glaciers for thousands of years open to sunlight once again. Rivers carve fresh channels across terrain untouched by human feet for countless generations. To modern eyes, these developments might seem exciting opportunities. For Ice Age people, they are also sources of uncertainty. Knowledge accumulated over centuries applies to familiar environments. Newly opened landscapes come without inherited experience. Migration routes must be learned, water sources identified, seasonal risks understood. Every expansion into fresh territory involves both promise and danger. Some regions change faster than others. Northern Europe offers a dramatic example. As glaciers withdraw, immense areas become habitable. Plants colonize exposed ground. Animals follow. Human groups move into spaces that had long been inaccessible. Similar processes occur across portions of North America, where retreating ice creates entirely new ecological zones. The scale of these transformations is difficult to exaggerate. Imagine a continent gradually revealing hidden landscapes larger than many modern nations. That is what the end of the Ice Age accomplishes. Meanwhile, the glaciers themselves are changing character. Rather than appearing as fixed barriers, they begin behaving like dynamic systems. Ice margins retreat. Massive blocks break away. Meltwater accumulates in enormous lakes along glacial edges. Rivers fed by melting ice grow increasingly powerful. In some places, the retreat proceeds unevenly. Periods of relative stability alternate with episodes of rapid change. Scholars still debate certain details because local conditions vary widely, but the overall trend is unmistakable. The ice is losing ground. The significance of this retreat extends far beyond temperature alone. Ice sheets influence atmospheric circulation across entire hemispheres. Their shrinking alters weather patterns, ocean currents, and regional climates. The consequences ripple outward through ecosystems and human societies alike. The people witnessing these developments possess no way to measure global temperatures or calculate orbital cycles, yet they are skilled observers of the natural world. They notice changes in migration timing. They recognize shifts in vegetation. They adapt to new opportunities and emerging challenges. Their survival depends on paying attention, and what the landscape is telling them becomes increasingly clear. The old order is weakening. The frozen world that shaped countless generations is beginning to loosen its grip. Rivers flow where ice once stood. Plants colonize new ground. Animals alter their movements. Familiar patterns become less reliable. The transformation is still in its early stages. The mammoths remain. The glaciers remain. The vast open plains remain. But beneath that apparent continuity, a profound transition is accelerating. The climate is no longer merely fluctuating around ancient norms. It is moving toward a different state entirely. The first humans to witness the end of the Ice Age do not yet understand where this journey will lead. They only know that the land is changing. And with every passing generation, those changes become harder to ignore. As the centuries pass, the changes that once seemed subtle become impossible to overlook. The great ice sheets that dominated entire horizons begin withdrawing from lands they had occupied for thousands of years. What starts as a gradual shift now reveals itself in visible, undeniable ways. Valleys emerge from beneath ice. New rivers cut through freshly exposed terrain. Entire regions that had long existed beyond human reach become accessible for the first time in countless generations. The retreat of the glaciers is one of the most dramatic events ever witnessed by human beings. To modern observers looking at satellite images and maps, the process appears orderly and measurable. To the people living through it, however, the experience is far more immediate and astonishing. Landscapes that elders describe from memory no longer match reality. Familiar landmarks disappear. New ones emerge. The boundaries of the known world begin moving. In some regions, ice margins retreat only a few meters each year. In others, the process accelerates dramatically. Massive quantities of frozen water accumulated over tens of thousands of years begin melting and flowing back into rivers, lakes, and oceans. The scale is difficult to comprehend. The Great Laurentide ice sheet covering much of North America stretches across millions of square kilometers. The Scandinavian ice sheet blankets enormous portions of northern Europe. Together with other glacial systems, they contain enough water to reshape coastlines across the planet. As warming continues, these frozen giants begin surrendering their territory. What emerges behind them is not a barren wasteland. Freshly exposed landscapes quickly become scenes of ecological opportunity. Wind carries seeds. Mosses and hardy plants establish themselves on raw ground. Insects arrive. Small animals follow. Larger herbivores move into newly available habitats. Predators trail behind. Life advances across terrain abandoned by ice. For human communities, these transformations create powerful incentives to explore. Groups that once occupied southern refuges gradually expand northward. Hunters follow migrating herds into regions inaccessible to earlier generations. Camps appear beside newly formed lakes and rivers. Archaeological evidence from Europe shows people moving steadily into territories opened by glacial retreat. The process resembles the uncovering of an entire continent. Every generation gains access to landscapes their ancestors never knew. Yet the retreating ice leaves behind more than opportunities. It also creates immense instability. Glaciers are not passive blocks of frozen water. They are dynamic systems constantly interacting with their surroundings. As they melt, they release enormous volumes of water. Some of this water forms lakes trapped between ice fronts and surrounding land. These glacial lakes can grow to extraordinary size. Many are temporary. Their existence depends on fragile barriers of ice or sediment. When those barriers fail, the consequences can be catastrophic. Evidence from North America suggests that some glacial lakes release unimaginable quantities of water during sudden outburst floods. Entire landscapes are reshaped within days or even hours. Valleys are scoured. Sediments are redistributed across vast distances. Rivers change course. The people living nearby may witness events unlike anything recorded in later human experience. A valley that appears stable for generations can suddenly become a corridor for raging floodwaters. Campsites may vanish. Migration routes may be disrupted. Resources may disappear almost overnight. No single explanation fully accounts for how individual communities respond because the archaeological evidence remains fragmentary. Many traces are lost beneath later sediments or destroyed by erosion. Yet what survives suggests that people repeatedly adapt to rapidly changing conditions. Adaptation becomes a defining feature of the age. As ice retreats, enormous meltwater rivers develop along glacial margins. Some dwarf many modern rivers. These waterways become both barriers and lifelines. They support fish populations. They provide access to fresh water. They create travel corridors through otherwise difficult terrain. At the same time, crossing them can be dangerous. Communities learn to navigate an increasingly complex world. One of the most remarkable consequences of glacial retreat occurs beneath the surface of the Earth itself. The immense weight of continental ice sheets has pressed down on the crust for thousands of years. In some places, the land is depressed by hundreds of meters under the burden of ice. As glaciers melt, that weight begins disappearing. The ground responds. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, portions of the Earth's crust begin rising. This process, known today as isostatic rebound, continues in some regions even now. Parts of Scandinavia and Canada are still recovering from the disappearance of Ice Age ice sheets thousands of years later. To ancient observers, these changes would be invisible within a single lifetime. Yet over generations, shorelines shift. Lakes change shape. Coastal environments evolve. The land itself is moving. Meanwhile, ecosystems continue reorganizing. Species adapted to colder environments gradually retreat northward or toward higher elevations. New species expand into warming territories. In some regions, forests begin advancing steadily into landscapes that were once open grasslands. The transformation creates winners and losers. Animals that depend on extensive open plains face growing pressure. Those adapted to woodland habitats often benefit. Human communities must continually adjust their hunting strategies as the distribution of wildlife changes. What once worked reliably may no longer produce results. A migration route used for centuries may decline in importance. A newly formed wetland may become a valuable resource. A valley previously blocked by ice may offer access to rich hunting grounds. The world rewards flexibility. Archaeological discoveries reveal increasing regional diversity during this period. As environments become more varied, human groups develop different strategies suited to local conditions. Some rely heavily on large game. Others expand their use of fish, birds, small mammals, and plant resources. The image of Ice Age people as mammoth hunters alone becomes increasingly incomplete. The end of the Ice Age encourages experimentation. Survival now depends not only on endurance but also on innovation. Every year of warming expands the possibilities available to human societies while simultaneously disrupting older patterns. The retreating glaciers symbolize both opportunity and uncertainty. For thousands of years they have served as permanent features of the world. Now they are withdrawing. Their departure opens vast territories, creates new ecosystems, alters rivers, reshapes climates, and transforms the lives of everyone living nearby. To modern scientists, these events form part of a long climatic transition reconstructed through geological evidence. To the people witnessing them, they are something far more personal. The horizon is changing. The rivers are changing. The animals are changing. Even the shape of the land is changing. The frozen world that once seemed eternal is slowly unraveling, and with every passing generation, humanity finds itself walking deeper into a planet becoming unfamiliar for the first time in thousands of years. As the glaciers continue their long retreat, they leave behind far more than exposed ground. Across continents, the melting ice releases extraordinary volumes of water into the landscape. Rivers swell beyond their previous limits. Valleys become channels for immense currents. Lakes appear where none existed before. Entire drainage systems reorganize themselves. The world emerging from the Ice Age is not merely warmer. It is wetter, more dynamic, and increasingly shaped by moving water. For the first humans witnessing these changes, the transformation must have seemed astonishing. Generations had lived with familiar rivers whose seasonal behavior was largely predictable. Now many waterways begin behaving differently. Spring melt becomes more powerful. Floodplains expand. New channels cut across old terrain. Areas that once served as hunting grounds may become marshes or shallow lakes. In some regions, the landscape is being rewritten almost year by year. The source of this change lies in the enormous stores of frozen water accumulated during the Ice Age. For thousands of years, glaciers have locked away vast quantities of moisture. As temperatures rise, that water returns to circulation. What appears to human observers as local flooding is often part of a much larger planetary process. The melting of continental ice sheets becomes one of the most important forces shaping the end of the Ice Age. Across North America, enormous glacial lakes develop along the margins of retreating ice. Some reach sizes difficult to imagine. One of the largest known today as Lake Agassiz eventually covers an area larger than many modern countries. Fed by meltwater and trapped by lingering ice barriers, It becomes a temporary inland sea stretching across portions of present-day Canada and the northern United States. People living near such lakes likely encounter environments unlike anything their ancestors experienced. Vast shorelines appear where open land once existed. Waterfowl gather in tremendous numbers. Fish populations expand. Wetlands develop around lake margins. These areas attract both animals and humans, creating new opportunities for survival. Yet enormous lakes also carry risks. The barriers containing them are often unstable. Ice can crack, sediment dams can fail. When that happens, catastrophic floods may follow. Geological evidence reveals episodes when immense volumes of water are released in relatively short periods. The resulting floods reshape landscapes on a scale almost unimaginable from a modern human perspective. Entire valleys are scoured clean. Massive boulders are transported great distances. New channels are carved into bedrock itself. Scholars continue debating the precise details of some flood events, but there is little doubt that sudden releases of glacial water play a major role in transforming post-Ice Age landscapes. For the people living nearby, such events would not appear as geological processes, they would appear as disasters. A river that has flowed peacefully for generations could suddenly become a destructive torrent. Camps might be abandoned, familiar routes could disappear beneath water, valuable hunting grounds might be altered forever. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation can reconstruct every local experience. Human stories rarely survive from this period, yet the landscapes themselves preserve clues. Sediment deposits, flood-carved channels, and ancient shorelines all suggest a world where water increasingly becomes one of the dominant forces of change. Not all transformations are sudden. Many unfold gradually enough to influence multiple generations. As glaciers retreat farther north, countless smaller lakes appear across newly exposed terrain. Some occupy depressions carved by ice. Others form where meltwater accumulates behind natural barriers. Together they create entirely new ecosystems. Fish expand into these freshwater environments. Birds establish nesting grounds. Plants adapted to wetter conditions spread rapidly. Human communities begin incorporating these resources into their survival strategies. The archaeological record shows growing evidence of dietary flexibility during this period. People continue hunting large animals, but many groups also increase their use of fish, waterfowl, shellfish, and smaller game. The changing environment rewards those capable of exploiting a wider range of resources. This adaptation proves increasingly important because the broader ecological picture is also shifting. The great grasslands that support massive herds of Ice Age animals begin changing in many regions. Wetter conditions encourage the spread of shrubs and forests. Open terrain becomes fragmented. Migration routes that once stretched uninterrupted across hundreds of kilometers become more complex. The animals respond, and humans must respond with them. The relationship between people and water grows more intimate as these transformations continue. Rivers become critical travel corridors. Lakes provide reliable food sources. Wetlands support diverse ecosystems. Yet every benefit comes with uncertainty, because water remains a force of constant movement. A river that creates opportunity in one generation may create obstacles in the next. Entire communities must learn to navigate landscapes that are becoming increasingly fluid. One of the most remarkable developments of the period occurs in regions newly freed from glacial ice. As meltwater flows across fresh terrain, it carries sediments that enrich soils and create fertile environments. Plants colonize these areas rapidly. Herbivores follow. Human groups often arrive soon afterward. What had been buried beneath ice for thousands of years becomes biologically productive in surprisingly short periods. This capacity for renewal is one of the defining characteristics of the post-glacial world. Life moves quickly when conditions allow. The people witnessing these changes may not understand the planetary mechanisms involved, but they recognize opportunities when they appear. New lakes mean fish. New wetlands mean birds and plant resources. New valleys mean fresh hunting territory. At the same time, every opportunity requires learning. Knowledge inherited from ancestors remains valuable, but it is no longer sufficient by itself. Communities must continually update their understanding of the landscape. They become observers of environmental change on a scale few human populations have ever experienced. Their world is no longer static. It is becoming a place of movement. Water flows through nearly every aspect of that transformation. It melts from glaciers. It fills lakes. It carves valleys. It reshapes ecosystems. It creates opportunities and destroys them. The ancient frozen world is dissolving not only through rising temperatures, but through the relentless action of rivers, floods, and expanding waterways. And as these new waters spread across the land, they are preparing the stage for even greater changes yet to come. Changes that will affect not just rivers and lakes, but the very animals that have defined the Ice Age itself. For countless generations, the giants of the Ice Age seem as permanent as the glaciers themselves. Mammoths move across the great grasslands in vast herds. Steppe bison graze the open plains. Giant deer carry antlers wider than many people are tall. Woolly rhinoceroses roam parts of Eurasia. Predators follow these animals across landscapes that appear built for them. To the humans living among these creatures, they are not relics of a distant age. They are simply part of the world. A child growing up near the end of the Ice Age may see mammoths as routinely as modern people see deer or cattle. Their tracks cross familiar routes. Their bones appear in campsites. Their ivory becomes tools, ornaments, and artwork. Stories likely pass between generations about successful hunts and dangerous encounters. For thousands of years, humans and megafauna coexist. Then something begins to change. The transformation is neither immediate nor uniform. In some regions, mammoths disappear earlier than in others. Certain populations survive for surprisingly long periods in isolated locations. Yet when viewed across continents, a larger pattern emerges. Many of the great Ice Age animals begin declining as the world warms. The causes remain one of the most debated subjects in prehistoric research. Scholars agree that numerous species vanished during the transition out of the Ice Age. What remains less certain is precisely why. Climate change clearly plays a major role. As temperatures rise, habitats supporting cold-adapted species begin shrinking. The mammoth steppe, once extending across enormous portions of Eurasia and North America, becomes increasingly fragmented. Forests spread into former grasslands. Wetlands expand. Ecological communities reorganize. For animals dependent upon vast open landscapes, these changes create mounting challenges. The woolly mammoth provides one of the clearest examples. Its thick coat, specialized adaptations, and feeding behavior suit the cold, dry grasslands of the Ice Age remarkably well. As those environments decline, mammoth populations face growing pressure. Food sources change, migration routes become disrupted, suitable habitat contracts. Yet climate alone may not tell the entire story. Humans are also becoming increasingly effective hunters. By the end of the Ice Age, Homo sapiens occupies large portions of the globe. Communities possess sophisticated tools, detailed environmental knowledge, and cooperative hunting strategies. In some areas, archaeological evidence suggests direct hunting of mammoths and other large animals. This has led some researchers to argue that human pressure contributes significantly to megafaunal decline. Others emphasize environmental change as the primary driver. Many now believe that no single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of these species. Instead, a combination of factors may be responsible. Climate stress weakens populations already facing habitat loss. Human hunting adds additional pressure. Together, these forces push vulnerable species toward extinction. The evidence remains incomplete and regional differences complicate the picture. What is clear is that the world inhabited by the first witnesses of the Ice Age's end is gradually losing some of its most iconic animals. For human communities, this is not merely an ecological event. It affects daily survival. Large animals provide enormous returns for hunting effort. A successful mammoth hunt can feed many people and supply valuable raw materials. As populations decline, hunters must adjust. Alternative resources become increasingly important. Fish birds, smaller mammals, and plant foods often assume larger roles. Adaptation once again becomes essential. The archaeological record reveals shifting patterns of subsistence across many regions. Communities diversify their diets. Specialized hunting traditions evolve. Local environments increasingly shape cultural practices. The age of giant herds is beginning to fade. The disappearance of megafauna also transforms the landscape itself. Large herbivores are not passive inhabitants of ecosystems. They shape vegetation through grazing, trampling, and nutrient distribution. Their movements influence plant communities across vast areas. When they decline, ecological consequences ripple outward. Some researchers suggest that the loss of mammoths and other large grazers may accelerate the spread of forests in certain regions. Open grasslands become more vulnerable to shrub and tree expansion. Ecosystems continue shifting toward configurations more familiar today. The world grows less Ice Age-like with each passing century. For the people living through this transition, the process likely unfolds gradually. Few individuals witness an entire species vanish. Extinction occurs over generations. A community may simply notice that mammoths become less common. Hunting expeditions travel farther before finding herds. Stories from elders describe animals encountered more frequently in the past. The absence grows slowly, yet eventually absence becomes undeniable. What once seemed permanent is no longer guaranteed. This experience carries profound implications. Human beings are observing something unprecedented within their cultural memory. The great creatures that help define the landscape are disappearing. Familiar ecological relationships begin breaking apart. Environmental knowledge accumulated over centuries requires constant revision. A hunter trained to understand mammoth migrations may find that such knowledge loses relevance. A community centered around particular hunting traditions may need entirely new strategies. Survival increasingly depends upon flexibility rather than continuity. Meanwhile, the climate continues changing. Temperatures fluctuate, ice retreats, rivers expand, forests spread. The disappearance of megafauna forms only one part of a much larger transformation reshaping the planet. Yet these animals leave powerful traces behind. Their bones remain preserved in permafrost caves, riverbanks, and ancient campsites. Their images survive in prehistoric art. Their tusks endure for thousands of years. Through archaeology and paleontology, modern researchers reconstruct fragments of a world where humans and mammoths once shared the same landscapes. Those fragments reveal not only loss but also resilience. Human communities survive the disappearance of many Ice Age giants. They adapt to new conditions. They exploit new resources. They move into changing environments and develop new ways of life. The end of the Mammoth Age does not mean the end of humanity. In some ways, it marks the beginning of a new chapter. But that chapter is far from stable. Because just as the planet seems to be warming steadily, the climate suddenly delivers a reminder that the transition out of the Ice Age will not proceed in a smooth or predictable fashion. The ancient cold is preparing one final return, and for the people already struggling to adapt to a changing world, the next surprise may prove even more unsettling than the retreat of the glaciers themselves. By roughly 13,000 years ago, many regions of the Northern Hemisphere appear to be moving steadily toward a warmer future. Glaciers continue retreating. Forests advance into former tundra. Lakes expand across newly exposed landscapes. human communities adapt to changing environments and increasingly diverse ecosystems. After thousands of years of cold conditions, the direction of history seems clear. Then the climate does something unexpected. The warming slows. In some places, it reverses dramatically. The Earth enters a period that modern scientists call the Younger Dryas, one of the most remarkable climate events known from the end of the Ice Age. For more than 1,000 years, temperatures across parts of the Northern Hemisphere decline sharply. Conditions that seem to be fading suddenly return. To the people living through it, the experience must be bewildering. Generations have already witnessed signs that the frozen world is loosening its grip. Now many of those trends begin changing once again. In some regions, advancing vegetation stalls. Colder conditions reappear. Environmental patterns become less predictable. The climate is no longer moving in a single direction. Instead, it behaves like a system struggling through instability. Evidence for this event comes from multiple sources. Ice cores extracted from Greenland show an abrupt cooling after a period of warming. Pollen records reveal shifts in vegetation. Lake sediments preserve signs of changing environmental conditions. Together, these records paint a picture of a world entering a sudden climatic reversal. What causes the Younger Dryas remains the subject of ongoing research. Many scientists believe that massive releases of fresh water from melting glaciers disrupt ocean circulation patterns in the North Atlantic. These disruptions may weaken the transport of heat normally carried northward by ocean currents. As a result, large regions experience renewed cooling. Other details remain debated. The evidence continues to be studied, and scholars refine their understanding as new data emerges. What remains clear is that the climate system proves far more capable of abrupt change than earlier generations of researchers once imagined. For human communities, such instability creates profound challenges. Adaptation is difficult enough when environmental change follows a relatively consistent direction. It becomes even harder when conditions reverse unexpectedly. Imagine a landscape beginning to support new plant communities and animal populations. Human groups adjust their movements accordingly. Then colder conditions return. Vegetation shifts again. Wildlife distributions change once more. Knowledge that seemed reliable becomes uncertain. The people experiencing these changes possess no concept of ocean circulation or atmospheric feedback mechanisms. They encounter only the consequences. A familiar hunting area becomes less productive. Winter conditions grow harsher. Migration patterns become harder to predict. Water availability shifts. The world once again demands adaptation. Archaeological evidence suggests that human communities respond in different ways depending on local circumstances. Some alter settlement patterns. Others expand the range of resources they exploit. Certain groups become increasingly mobile, while others focus more heavily on particular ecological niches. There is no single response because there is no single environment. The Younger Dryas affects different regions differently. Some areas experience pronounced cooling. Others encounter more subtle changes. Local geography, existing ecosystems, and patterns of human movement all influence how communities experience the event. Yet one common theme emerges repeatedly. Flexibility becomes a survival strategy. The lesson has appeared throughout human history, but the end of the Ice Age demonstrates it with unusual clarity. The communities most capable of adjusting to changing conditions are often the ones best positioned to endure. The Younger Dryas also serves as a reminder that environmental transformation is rarely smooth. Modern discussions of climate change sometimes imagine gradual trends unfolding predictably over centuries. The end of the Ice Age reveals a more complicated reality. Large climate systems can shift rapidly. Feedback loops can produce surprising outcomes. Progress toward a warmer world does not necessarily occur in a straight line. The first humans witnessing these events learn that nature can reverse course without warning. Meanwhile, the broader ecological consequences continue unfolding. Cold-adapted species temporarily regain advantages in some regions. Vegetation boundaries shift. Forest expansion slows or retreats. The distribution of animals changes yet again. Human communities must remain attentive. Observation becomes as important as tradition. Inherited knowledge still matters enormously, but environmental conditions now evolve quickly enough that each generation accumulates experiences slightly different from the last. Parents pass on what they know, but children increasingly encounter circumstances that ancestors never faced. This creates both challenges and opportunities. New conditions encourage experimentation. Different tool types appear in some regions. Hunting strategies evolve. Communities develop specialized responses suited to local environments. What survives in the archaeological record suggests remarkable resilience. Despite dramatic climatic fluctuations, humans continue expanding into new territories. They maintain social networks. They adapt technologies. They persist through uncertainty. The Younger Dryas may represent a climatic setback, but it does not halt the larger trajectory of human survival. In fact, it highlights one of the species' defining characteristics. Humans rarely dominate environments through physical strength alone. They succeed through learning, through cooperation, through adaptation. The people living near the end of the Ice Age embody these qualities repeatedly. They face retreating glaciers, shifting rivers, disappearing megafauna, and now an unexpected return of colder conditions. Each challenge requires adjustment, and still they endure. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Younger Dryas is that it demonstrates how fragile assumptions about environmental stability can be. A warming world suddenly becomes colder again. Apparent trends reverse. Expectations fail. For communities dependent on nature's rhythm, such unpredictability carries enormous consequences. Yet the cooling is not permanent. The ancient cold has one final resurgence, but it cannot stop the larger transformation already underway. Beneath the fluctuations, the long-term warming trend continues building momentum. Eventually, the Younger Dryas comes to an end. When it does, the world changes with astonishing speed. Temperatures rise once more. The glaciers resume their retreat. Forests advance. Rivers expand. And beyond the horizon, another transformation is gathering force, one that will alter coastlines across the planet and erase entire landscapes that human beings have known for thousands of years. The water locked within the Ice Age is still melting, and soon it will begin claiming the edges of the land itself. For most of human history up to this point, coastlines exist far from where they are found today. The people living near the end of the Ice Age inherit a world in which enormous quantities of water remain trapped inside glaciers and ice sheets. Because so much water is locked away as ice, global sea levels are dramatically lower than modern ones. The consequences reshape entire continents. Places that are now seabeds once support grasslands, rivers, forests, and human communities. Vast coastal plains extend far beyond present shorelines. Islands that later become isolated remain connected to larger landmasses. Entire landscapes exist that no modern person will ever see. For thousands of years these lands appear permanent, then the oceans begin advancing. The process unfolds gradually when measured against a human lifetime, yet relentlessly when viewed across generations. As glaciers continue melting, water returns to the seas, coastlines shift, river mouths migrate inland, low-lying plains disappear beneath rising water. The first humans to witness these changes are among the earliest people in history forced to confront the reality that land itself can vanish. To modern observers, rising sea levels are measured with satellites and instruments. Ancient communities possess no such tools. They experience the phenomenon directly. A familiar shoreline moves. A hunting ground becomes marshland. A seasonal campsite floods more frequently. A river crossing becomes deeper each year. The changes are subtle at first. Then they accumulate. One generation notices small differences. The next inherits a coastline already altered from what their grandparents remember. Over centuries, entire regions transform beyond recognition. Among the most remarkable lost landscapes is the broad plain that once connected Britain to continental Europe. Today, the waters of the North Sea separate the British Isles from the mainland. Near the end of the Ice Age, however, much of that area consists of dry land. Modern researchers refer to this vanished territory as Doggerland. At its greatest extent, it supports rivers, wetlands, forests, and abundant wildlife. Human groups travel across it, hunt there, and likely establish seasonal camps. It is not an isolated wilderness, but part of a connected world stretching across northwestern Europe. As sea levels rise, Doggerland begins disappearing. The process takes thousands of years, but the result is profound. Areas once crossed on foot gradually become fragmented by expanding waterways. Low-lying regions flood. Communities must relocate. Ancient routes vanish beneath the sea. Eventually, the land itself is gone. Only traces buried beneath marine sediments remain. Doggerland is not unique. Across the world, similar stories unfold. The shallow continental shelves surrounding many modern coastlines are exposed during the Ice Age. As sea levels rise, these areas flood. Southeast Asia provides one of the most dramatic examples. During periods of lower sea level, large portions of what are now separate islands form part of an enormous connected landmass known as Sunderland. Rivers flow across plains that today lie underwater. Animals migrate through territories now hidden beneath the sea. Human populations occupy landscapes lost to modern memory. As the oceans advance, these connections weaken and disappear. Islands become isolated. Coastlines retreat inland. Communities adapt to changing geography. The transformation affects not only where people live, but how they move. Travel routes that exist for generations become impossible. New waterways create barriers and opportunities. Boats likely assume increasing importance in some regions as coastlines become more fragmented. What survives in the archaeological record suggests remarkable flexibility. Human groups repeatedly adjust to environmental changes that unfold over centuries. Settlements shift. Resource strategies evolve. Populations move when necessary. Yet adaptation does not eliminate loss. Entire landscapes disappear forever. The emotional consequences remain impossible to reconstruct fully. No written records preserve the thoughts of people watching familiar territory gradually surrender to the sea. Archaeology reveals patterns of movement and settlement, but inner experiences remain largely beyond reach. Still, certain realities seem unavoidable. People notice. Generations witness shorelines retreating. Communities abandon flooded locations. Stories likely emerge around disappearing lands. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is difficult to imagine that such dramatic transformations leave no impression on human memory. This possibility has inspired considerable discussion among researchers. Some scholars suggest that ancient flood traditions found in later cultures may preserve distant echoes of real environmental changes experienced at the end of the Ice Age. Such ideas remain difficult to prove. Oral traditions evolve over time, and direct connections are often impossible to establish. No single explanation fully accounts for the many flood narratives found around the world. Yet it is undeniable that millions of square kilometers of land disappear beneath rising seas during the transition out of the Ice Age. Human beings witness those losses firsthand. The scale is extraordinary. Global sea levels rise by more than 100 meters between the height of the last Ice Age and the modern era. Coastlines shift across every continent. The map of the world is effectively redrawn. The people living through this process are not passive observers. They continue adapting. Coastal environments often become rich ecological zones. Estuaries support fish. Wetlands attract birds. Shellfish provide reliable food resources. Many communities thrive in these changing settings even as the seas advance. The relationship between humans and rising water remains complex. The ocean destroys old opportunities while creating new ones. A drowned plain may become a productive coastline. A flooded valley may support fisheries. An abandoned route may lead to the discovery of another. Still, the overall direction is unmistakable. The Ice Age world is shrinking. The exposed coastal landscapes that once connected regions and supported human populations are steadily disappearing. Every century claims more territory. Every generation inherits a slightly different map. The oceans are winning ground, and as the waters continue rising, they erase not only campsites and hunting grounds, but entire chapters of human experience. Beneath the waves lie countless traces of lives once lived on dry land, reminders that the first witnesses of the Ice Age's end are also witnesses to one of the greatest geographical transformations in human history. The lost coasts sink beneath the sea. The old world recedes, and with it vanish landscapes that had shaped human journeys for thousands of years. As the seas continue advancing across the lowlands of the world, the transformation is not experienced everywhere as a slow and steady process. In some regions, the rising water seems almost patient, creeping inland over generations. In others, the changes arrive with startling force. Storms cut new channels through vulnerable coastlines. River systems reorganize. Natural barriers collapse. Entire sections of landscape can disappear within a comparatively short span of time. For the people living through these events, the distinction between gradual change and sudden catastrophe often blurs. A coastline may remain relatively stable for decades before a powerful storm destroys part of it. A familiar wetland may expand slowly year after year, then rapidly consume surrounding land during a series of unusually wet seasons. Human memory captures these dramatic moments more easily than the slow movements unfolding behind them. This reality has led many researchers to wonder how ancient communities remembered the environmental upheavals surrounding the end of the Ice Age. The question remains difficult to answer. No written records survive from these populations. Archaeologists recover tools, bones, campsites, and environmental evidence, but stories rarely leave direct traces. Yet human beings are natural storytellers. Important events are remembered, repeated, and adapted across generations. The possibility that memories of ancient floods survive within later traditions continues to attract interest. Care is necessary here. Popular culture sometimes presents such ideas as established fact. The evidence does not support that certainty. Scholars remain cautious because proving a direct connection between prehistoric environmental events and much later myths is extraordinarily difficult. Nevertheless, the broader context is undeniable. The end of the Ice Age involves real floods, real disappearing coastlines, and real communities confronting dramatic environmental changes. Some of the most striking examples occur where rising seas interact with low-lying landscapes. Doggerland, the vast plain that once connected Britain to continental Europe, continues shrinking. Rivers that once crossed broad grasslands become estuaries. Wetlands spread. Higher ground turns into islands. Eventually, even those islands begin disappearing. Recent archaeological discoveries recovered from the floor of the North Sea reveal fragments of this vanished world. Fishermen occasionally bring up mammoth bones, stone tools, and other ancient remains. Beneath the water lies evidence of a landscape once filled with life. Thousands of years ago, people walk where fishing boats now travel. The contrast is remarkable. Similar stories unfold elsewhere. Around the coasts of Southeast Asia, rising seas gradually separate previously connected territories. In the Americas, shorelines migrate inland. Along many continental shelves, ancient campsites and migration routes vanish beneath advancing water. The losses are so extensive that some archaeologists describe the drowned coastal plains as one of the largest missing chapters in human prehistory. This missing chapter matters because coastlines are often attractive places for settlement. They provide access to food transportation routes and diverse resources. Many of the people living near the end of the Ice Age likely spend time along shores that no longer exist. Their traces now lie underwater. The challenge of studying these submerged landscapes means that important pieces of the story remain hidden. Advances in underwater archaeology continue revealing new evidence, but vast areas remain unexplored. The record quite literally is beneath the sea, yet even without complete evidence a picture begins to emerge. The first humans witnessing the end of the Ice Age are living through a period when geography itself is changing. Mountains remain where they have always been. Major river systems continue flowing, but coastlines, islands, estuaries, and lowland plains are undergoing continual transformation. Maps drawn 1,000 years apart would look noticeably different. Few periods in human history experience environmental change on such a scale. What makes this transformation especially significant is its impact on movement. For tens of thousands of years, human migration often follows routes determined by geography. Land bridges connect regions. Coastal plains provide corridors for travel. Rivers create pathways through difficult terrain. As sea levels rise, many of these routes disappear. Communities become separated from one another. Travel grows more complicated. Some populations find themselves increasingly isolated. Others adapt by developing stronger maritime traditions. The archaeological evidence suggests that human beings are more than capable of responding to these challenges. Watercraft likely play growing roles in certain regions. Coastal resources become increasingly important. New patterns of trade and interaction emerge. Human adaptability once again proves remarkable. Yet adaptation does not prevent nostalgia. Although direct evidence is impossible to recover, it is difficult to imagine people watching familiar territories vanish without emotional consequences. Places associated with ancestors disappear beneath rising water. Hunting grounds are lost. Travel routes become inaccessible. Landscapes carry meaning. When landscapes disappear, part of that meaning disappears with them. Perhaps nowhere is this clearer than in the growing separation between memory and reality. An elder may describe a place visited during youth only for younger generations to know it as open water. Stories become records of vanished worlds. This pattern has repeated throughout history, whenever environmental change alters familiar surroundings. The end of the Ice Age simply does it on an enormous scale. Meanwhile, the environmental transformations continue spreading inland. The consequences of warming are no longer limited to glaciers and coastlines. Forests advance steadily across former grasslands. Ecosystems reorganize. Animals shift their ranges. Human communities encounter landscapes increasingly different from those known by earlier generations. The open world of the mammoth steppe is shrinking. The forests are coming, and with them arrives a new set of challenges. The people who once followed great herds across vast treeless plains must soon confront an environment where visibility is reduced, movement becomes more difficult, and hunting requires entirely different skills. The rising seas have already changed the edges of the world. Now the interior is about to change as well. A new landscape is spreading across the continents, and it will transform human life just as profoundly as the retreat of the glaciers and the advance of the oceans. For much of the Ice Age, enormous regions of the Northern Hemisphere are defined by openness. Grasslands stretch beyond the horizon. Low vegetation dominates the landscape. Herds of grazing animals travel across vast distances with relatively few obstacles in their path. Human hunters can often observe movement across kilometers of terrain. Visibility becomes one of the defining characteristics of the age. Then the trees begin returning. At first the change appears modest. Scattered stands of birch emerge in sheltered locations. Small groves establish themselves along rivers and lakes. Shrubs become more common across former tundra. The transformation unfolds gradually enough that no single generation experiences its full extent, Yet century after century the forests continue advancing. As temperatures rise following the final retreat from Ice Age conditions, ecosystems across Europe, Asia and North America begin reorganizing on a massive scale. Plant species expand into newly favorable environments. Trees colonize exposed landscapes left behind by retreating glaciers. Areas once dominated by open grassland slowly acquire a different character. The consequences are profound. A forest is not simply a collection of trees. It is an entirely different ecological system. Light levels change. Animal communities change. Movement patterns change. Human strategies change. For the people witnessing these developments, the advance of forests may be every bit as significant as the retreat of glaciers. The mammoth steppe had rewarded long-distance observation. Hunters could track herds across open terrain. Large grazing animals flourished in environments rich with grasses and herbs. Human mobility often depended upon following seasonal movements through broad landscapes. Forests alter those relationships. Visibility decreases dramatically. Travel becomes slower. Dense vegetation creates barriers where none existed before. Sound behaves differently beneath a canopy. Hunting techniques that prove effective in open country may become less useful among trees. The world begins demanding new skills. The animals respond as well. Some species benefit from expanding forests. Deer populations often increase. Wild boar spread into suitable habitats. Smaller mammals thrive in diverse woodland environments. Birds adapted to forest ecosystems become more common. Other species face increasing challenges. Large grazing animals dependent on extensive open terrain find themselves under growing pressure. Habitat fragmentation limits movement. Food resources change. Ecological relationships built over thousands of years begin breaking apart. The decline of mammoths and other Ice Age megafauna continues against this backdrop. Climate change, habitat transformation, and human pressures combine in complex ways. No single explanation fully accounts for every regional pattern, but the broader trend is unmistakable. The age of open grasslands is fading. The age of forests is beginning. Archaeological evidence reveals that human communities adapt with remarkable flexibility. As ecosystems diversify, so do subsistence strategies. People exploit a wider range of resources than before. Fishing becomes increasingly important in many regions. Hunting focuses on different species. Plant foods assume greater significance in some environments. The changing landscape encourages experimentation. Rather than depending primarily on a handful of large animals, many groups begin drawing from a broader spectrum of resources. This shift carries important consequences. A more diverse diet often creates greater resilience against environmental fluctuations. If one resource declines, others may remain available. Communities become less vulnerable to the disappearance of particular species or changes in migration patterns. Adaptation continues to be humanity's greatest strength. The archaeological record also suggests increasing regional diversity in ways of life. During the height of the Ice Age, many environments share certain broad similarities across large areas. As warming progresses and forests expand, ecosystems become more varied from place to place. Different regions encourage different solutions. Communities living beside rich river systems develop strategies distinct from those occupying dense woodlands. Coastal populations exploit marine resources. Inland groups focus on forests, lakes, and game animals. Human cultures become increasingly shaped by local environments. The world is no longer dominated by a single ecological theme. Instead, it becomes a mosaic. Forests, wetlands, rivers, coastlines, and grasslands coexist across shifting landscapes. Each presents opportunities and challenges. Each influences the people who live there. One particularly significant consequence of forest expansion involves mobility. The open plains of the Ice Age allow relatively easy long-distance travel. Forests can make movement more difficult and time-consuming. Routes that once crossed broad grasslands become obstructed by dense vegetation. Communities may become more closely tied to particular regions as local resources grow increasingly abundant. Patterns of settlement begin evolving. The evidence remains incomplete, and archaeologists continue debating many details. Human societies at this time remain highly mobile by modern standards. Yet there are indications that some groups spend longer periods in favoured locations, especially where rivers, lakes, and rich ecosystems provide reliable resources. The changing environment encourages new relationships with place. This development may seem subtle, but it marks an important transition. For much of the Ice Age, survival often depends on following animals across enormous territories. In the post-glacial world, certain environments offer sufficient diversity and abundance to support more stable patterns of occupation. The seeds of future transformations are beginning to appear. Not agriculture, not cities, not civilizations. Those developments still lie thousands of years in the future. But the environmental conditions that will eventually make such changes possible are slowly emerging. The forests spreading across the continents are part of that process. The people witnessing them cannot know what the distant future holds. They see only the immediate realities of adaptation, new hunting strategies, new resources, new landscapes. Yet from the perspective of deep history, they are living through a turning point. The planet is becoming recognizable to modern eyes. The glaciers continue retreating. Sea levels continue rising. The giant herds continue declining. And now the forests continue advancing. Together, these transformations are creating a world fundamentally different from the one their ancestors knew. The last great landscapes of the Ice Age are disappearing. In their place, a new Earth is taking shape, one filled with opportunities, uncertainties and possibilities that no previous generation has ever encountered. As forests spread, rivers expand, and coastlines shift, human communities find themselves living in environments that would have seemed unfamiliar to their distant Ice Age ancestors. The changes are no longer isolated events. They are becoming the defining reality of life. Entire generations grow up knowing landscapes that did not exist only a few centuries earlier. The challenge is no longer merely surviving environmental change. The challenge is learning how to thrive within it. This period becomes one of the greatest chapters of human adaptation. The people who witness the end of the Ice Age are not passive victims carried along by forces beyond their control. They are active participants in a vast process of adjustment. Every environmental transformation creates new problems, but it also creates new opportunities. Human ingenuity begins responding to both. One of the clearest signs of this adaptation appears in technology. Stone tools continue evolving. Communities refine hunting equipment to suit changing environments. In open grasslands, long-distance pursuit may have been effective. In expanding forests, hunters increasingly require different approaches. Animals become harder to spot. Ambush strategies grow more important. Tools suited to a wider variety of prey gain value. The archaeological record reveals regional innovation rather than a single universal solution. Groups respond differently depending on local conditions. Some focus heavily on fishing technologies. Others develop specialized hunting equipment for woodland environments. Certain communities become experts at exploiting wetlands and river systems. Everywhere, people are experimenting. The changing world rewards flexibility. This flexibility extends beyond tools. Human movement patterns also evolve. Throughout much of the Ice Age, following migratory herds often requires extensive seasonal travel. In some post-glacial environments, however, resources become more concentrated and diverse. Rivers support fish, forests provide game, wetlands attract birds, lakes offer reliable food sources. When multiple resources exist in close proximity, communities may not need to travel as far or as often. The evidence remains complex, and scholars continue debating specific regional patterns. Yet many archaeological sites suggest increasing use of favoured locations where abundant resources support repeated occupation. People begin developing deeper relationships with particular places. These places are not permanent settlements in the later agricultural sense. Mobility remains an essential feature of life. Nevertheless, the rhythm of movement is changing. A river valley rich in fish may attract generations of visitors. A lakeshore abundant with wildlife may become a recurring destination. A coastal estuary may provide dependable resources year after year. Knowledge accumulates around these locations. Communities learn the seasonal behavior of fish runs. They observe bird migrations. They understand the best times to gather plants or hunt specific animals. The environment remains dynamic, but human understanding of it grows increasingly sophisticated. Social adaptation becomes equally important. Environmental uncertainty encourages cooperation. Information networks linking distant groups continue providing valuable knowledge. News of changing conditions, resource availability, and migration opportunities can spread through these connections. The exact nature of these networks remains difficult to reconstruct. No written records survive. Yet evidence from traded materials and shared technological traditions suggests that communities remain linked across surprisingly large distances. Human beings are not adapting alone. They are adapting together. This collective resilience helps explain why Homo sapiens successfully navigates one of the most dramatic environmental transitions in prehistory. Other species struggle to adjust. Some disappear entirely. Humans survive because they combine observation, innovation, communication, and cooperation. The end of the Ice Age becomes a demonstration of the species' greatest strengths. Another important adaptation involves diet. The decline of some large game animals encourages broader use of available resources. Archaeological sites increasingly reveal evidence of varied subsistence strategies. Fish, shellfish, birds, small mammals, nuts, seeds, and edible plants all contribute to survival in different regions. This diversification offers advantages. A community relying on a single resource can face disaster if that resource declines. A community drawing from many sources often possesses greater resilience. The changing environment encourages precisely this kind of flexibility. In many ways, the post-glacial world becomes more complex than the Ice Age world. The Great Mammoth Steppe, despite its immense scale, supports relatively uniform ecological conditions across large areas. The warming world produces greater diversity. Forests, wetlands, rivers, lakes, grasslands, and coastlines create a patchwork of environments. Human cultures respond with a corresponding diversity of strategies. One group may specialize in river fishing. Another may focus on forest hunting. A coastal population may rely heavily on marine resources. Each solution reflects local conditions. Each represents a different path through the same period of transformation. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these adaptations is how quickly they occur. From the perspective of geological time, the end of the Ice Age unfolds rapidly. Environmental systems reorganize within a few thousand years. Human societies repeatedly adjust within that changing framework. The archaeological record preserves countless examples of this resilience. New technologies appear, settlement patterns shift, resource use evolves, cultural traditions adapt. Again and again, communities respond creatively to circumstances their ancestors never faced. This does not mean the process is easy. Environmental change undoubtedly brings hardship. Some territories become less productive. Familiar resources disappear. Entire landscapes vanish beneath rising seas. The evidence suggests periods of stress, displacement, and uncertainty. Yet the broader pattern remains one of survival. The people witnessing the end of the Ice Age are not merely enduring change. They are mastering it. And in doing so, they are laying foundations for future developments that remain invisible to them. The world taking shape around them will eventually support agriculture villages, trade networks, cities, kingdoms, and civilizations. None of those outcomes is inevitable. None is immediately apparent, but the environmental conditions that make them possible are emerging. For now, however, the story remains one of adaptation. The glaciers continue shrinking, the forests continue spreading, the coastlines continue retreating, and humanity continues adjusting, proving once again that survival is not simply a matter of strength, but of learning how to live within a world that never stops changing. As the Ice Age loosens its final grip on the planet, the map of human possibility expands alongside the changing climate. Lands that had been hidden beneath glaciers for thousands of years become accessible. Valleys emerge from ice. New river systems appear. Forests spread into freshly open territory. Across entire continents, pathways that once ended in frozen barriers now continue into unknown landscapes. Human beings begin moving into these new worlds. The migrations taking place during this period are not single dramatic journeys, undertaken by large populations marching toward clear destinations. They're usually slower, more gradual processes. Small groups explore new territory. Families follow familiar resources farther than previous generations. Communities expand into regions that become increasingly hospitable as the climate warms. The result is one of the greatest geographical expansions in prehistoric history. Northern Europe offers one of the clearest examples. For much of the Ice Age, enormous glaciers make large portions of the region uninhabitable. As the ice retreats, vast territories become available. Plants arrive first, animals follow. Human communities soon move into landscapes untouched by people for thousands of years. What survives in the archaeological record suggests a remarkable pace of exploration. Within relatively short periods of time, groups establish themselves across newly opened environments. Lakes, rivers, forests, and coastlines provide abundant opportunities. The expanding post-glacial world becomes a frontier unlike any previous generation has known. A similar process unfolds elsewhere. Across North America, retreating ice sheets reveal enormous areas previously buried beneath frozen landscapes. Human populations continue spreading through regions that become increasingly accessible. Rivers and lakes create corridors for movement. Wildlife expands into new habitats. Communities follow. The details remain the subject of ongoing research because evidence from this period is often fragmentary. Archaeologists continue discovering new sites that reshape understanding of how people moved across changing landscapes. The picture that emerges is one of extraordinary mobility. Humans are not waiting for the world to stabilize. They are moving with the change itself. This willingness to explore proves crucial. Newly open territory often contains unfamiliar opportunities. Different animal species occupy the landscape. Plant communities vary. Rivers create new travel routes. Knowledge must be built from direct experience. Every migration becomes a process of learning. People observe seasonal cycles. They identify safe pathways. They locate reliable water sources. They discover where animals gather during different times of year. The expansion of human presence across post-glacial landscapes depends as much on information as on physical movement. Knowledge travels with people. One generation's discoveries become the foundation for the next generation's journeys. The changing geography of the world also influences patterns of connection. In some regions, rising seas sever ancient routes and isolate populations. Elsewhere, retreating glaciers create entirely new pathways. The result is a constantly shifting network of opportunities and barriers. The end of the Ice Age is not merely changing the climate, it is redesigning the geography of human movement. Certain regions become particularly important. River valleys serve as natural corridors through difficult terrain. Coastlines rich in resources attract repeated occupation. Lakes support diverse ecosystems capable of sustaining both animals and people. Communities often gravitate toward these productive environments. Over time, some locations acquire special significance because they consistently provide food, water, and access to surrounding territory. The archaeological evidence reveals repeated use of certain landscapes across generations. This does not mean permanent settlement in the modern sense. Mobility remains central to life, yet patterns of familiarity emerge. Certain places become recurring destinations within broader seasonal cycles. The relationship between people and place is becoming deeper. Another consequence of these migrations involves cultural exchange. As groups move through changing environments, they encounter other communities. Ideas spread alongside people. Technologies travel across regions. Knowledge regarding resources and survival strategies moves through social networks. The archaeological record preserves traces of these connections in surprising ways. Stone materials sometimes appear far from their original sources. Similar tool-making techniques emerge across large areas. Decorative objects reveal shared influences. These patterns suggest that prehistoric populations are often more interconnected than older stereotypes imply. Even in a world without writing roads or cities, information can travel remarkable distances. The changing post-glacial landscape encourages such interactions. Movement creates opportunities for exchange. Exchange creates opportunities for innovation. Innovation enhances survival. This cycle becomes one of the defining characteristics of humanity's response to the end of the Ice Age. Yet every new opportunity carries uncertainty. The people entering newly accessible territory possess no maps. They do not know what lies beyond distant hills or unfamiliar rivers. Every expansion involves risk. Weather can change unexpectedly. Resources may prove less reliable than expected. Unknown hazards may exist beyond the horizon. The courage required for exploration should not be underestimated. The archaeological record often preserves only the successes. Failed journeys leave fewer traces, yet the willingness of human communities to move into unfamiliar landscapes repeatedly shapes the story of this period. It is one reason Homo sapiens becomes such a successful species. The world emerging from the Ice Age rewards curiosity, as glaciers retreat farther and the climate continues warming. The pace of environmental transformation remains relentless. New territories appear, old territories disappear, coastlines shift, forests expand. Human populations adapt not by resisting these changes but by moving through them. Generation after generation, people step into landscapes their ancestors never knew. Some follow rivers carved by meltwater. Others travel along coasts transformed by rising seas. Still others enter forests growing where open grasslands once stood. Together they become pioneers of a new earth. The ancient frozen world is fading behind them. Ahead lies a planet increasingly recognizable to modern eyes, yet still filled with uncertainties. And buried beneath its changing surface are clues that will one day allow future generations to reconstruct this remarkable chapter in human history. Long after the last mammoths disappear from most regions and the great glaciers retreat toward their modern remnants, the story of the Ice Age remains hidden beneath the ground. The people who lived through these transformations leave no written accounts. They record no dates. They create no maps explaining how rivers changed course or how coastlines moved inland. Yet despite that silence, traces of their world survive. The earth becomes an archive. Every layer of sediment, every fragment of bone, every abandoned campsite preserves a small piece of a much larger story. Thousands of years later, archaeologists, geologists, paleoclimatologists, and other researchers begin uncovering those fragments. Slowly they reconstruct the experiences of the first humans who witnessed the end of the Ice Age. The process resembles assembling an immense puzzle from scattered pieces. A stone tool discovered beside an ancient river reveals where people once travelled. A pollen sample extracted from lake sediments reveals which plants grew in a particular region. Animal bones indicate changes in hunting patterns. Layers of mud deposited by floods reveal episodes of environmental upheaval. None of these clues tells the whole story by itself. Together, they reveal a world in transition. One of the most powerful sources of evidence comes from ancient lakes. Year after year, lakes accumulate sediments on their bottoms. Tiny particles settle through the water and form layers, creating natural records of environmental conditions. Pollen grains preserved within these sediments allow scientists to identify which plants dominated surrounding landscapes at different times. The results are remarkable. By examining pollen sequences, researchers can watch forests advance across former grasslands. They can trace the spread of birch pine and other tree species. They can observe ecological transformations that unfolded over thousands of years. What appears permanent in a human lifetime becomes dynamic when viewed through geological records. Ice cores provide another extraordinary archive. Deep within Greenland and Antarctica, layers of ancient snow accumulate year after year. Over time, these layers compress into ice-trapping tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere. Scientists drilling into these ice sheets recover records stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. These frozen archives reveal temperature changes, atmospheric composition, volcanic eruptions, and other environmental information. Through them, researchers identify dramatic events such as the Younger Dryas. They discover that climate can shift with surprising speed. They uncover evidence that the end of the Ice Age is not a simple steady warming, but a complex series of fluctuations and transitions. The people living through these events never see the larger pattern. Modern science reconstructs it from evidence hidden beneath ice and sediment. Meanwhile, archaeology provides a more human perspective. Ancient campsites reveal where communities live. Hearths preserve traces of cooking and daily life. Animal remains show which species are hunted. Stone tools reveal technological choices. Sometimes the discoveries are unexpectedly intimate. A discarded spear point, a broken ornament, a child's footprint preserved in ancient mud. These small traces bridge enormous spans of time. They remind modern observers that the end of the Ice Age is not merely a climatic event. It is a human experience lived by countless individuals whose names are lost, but whose actions remain visible in subtle ways. Some of the most fascinating evidence comes from submerged landscapes. As sea levels rise after the Ice Age, entire regions disappear beneath the oceans. For centuries, these drowned worlds remain inaccessible. Only recently have advances in underwater archaeology begun revealing their secrets. The floor of the North Sea provides a striking example. Beneath the water lies Doggerland, once home to rivers, forests, wetlands, animals and human communities. Fishing nets occasionally recover mammoth bones and prehistoric tools from the seabed. Sophisticated surveys reveal traces of ancient landscapes hidden beneath marine sediments. The discoveries transform understanding of Europe's prehistory. Places once dismissed as empty seabeds become recognized as lost human environments. Similar discoveries are occurring around the world. Submerged coastlines preserve evidence of ancient migration routes and settlement areas. The challenge is immense because so much of humanity's Ice Age history now lies underwater. The record remains incomplete, and yet the fragments continue accumulating. Another crucial source of information comes from ancient DNA. Advances in genetic research allow scientists to recover genetic material from human remains, animal bones, and even sediments. These discoveries reveal population movements, relationships between groups and responses to environmental change. The field has transformed understanding of prehistory within just a few decades. Questions once considered impossible to answer now have at least partial explanations. Researchers can track migrations. They can identify connections between distant populations. They can observe how both humans and animals respond to climatic shifts. Still, important uncertainties remain. The evidence does not answer every question. Many archaeological sites have been destroyed by erosion, flooding, or later human activity. Vast regions remain unexplored. New discoveries regularly challenge older assumptions. Scholars still debate numerous details regarding migrations, extinctions, and environmental transformations. No single explanation fully accounts for every aspect of the Ice Age's ending. The complexity of the evidence mirrors the complexity of the events themselves. Perhaps that is what makes this period so compelling. It sits at the boundary between worlds. The traces preserved beneath the Earth reveal a planet undergoing extraordinary change. Glaciers retreat, rivers expand, forests spread, coastlines disappear, animal populations rise and fall, human beings adapt. Every piece of evidence reinforces that central theme. The people witnessing the end of the Ice Age are not passive observers overwhelmed by environmental forces. They are active participants in a constantly changing world. They adjust their movements, technologies, diets, and social connections in response to new realities. The clues buried beneath sediments, hidden within ice and scattered across ancient landscapes tell a story of resilience. Yet they also reveal something else. Despite all that scientists have learned, important mysteries remain unresolved. Why do certain species vanish while others survive? What exactly triggers some climatic reversals? How rapidly do different regions change? The evidence continues offering answers, but it also continues raising new questions. And those questions lead directly into one of the most enduring debates surrounding the end of the Ice Age, a debate that continues to shape scientific discussions even today. The deeper scientists investigate the end of the Ice Age, the clearer one fact becomes. It is impossible to explain this extraordinary period with a single simple narrative. The evidence reveals immense climatic shifts, disappearing species, rising seas, expanding forests, changing rivers, and migrating human populations. Yet whenever researchers attempt to identify one ultimate cause behind every transformation, the story becomes more complicated. The end of the Ice Age remains one of the most intensely studied periods in human prehistory, precisely because so many important questions remain open. Some debates focus on climate, others focus on extinction. Still others examine the interactions between environmental change and human activity. The challenge is that all these processes occur simultaneously. The Earth is warming, glaciers are retreating, sea levels are rising, habitats are changing, human populations are expanding. Each influence affects the others. Untangling those relationships is extraordinarily difficult. Consider the disappearance of the mammoths. At first glance, climate change seems an obvious explanation. As temperatures rise, the open grasslands that support mammoth populations begin shrinking. Forests expand. Moisture levels increase in many regions. Suitable habitat becomes fragmented. The argument appears persuasive. Yet mammoths have already survived previous climatic fluctuations during earlier Ice Age cycles. Why does this transition prove different? Some researchers emphasize human hunting pressure. By the end of the Ice Age, Homo sapiens occupies much of the mammoth's range. Human hunters possess sophisticated tools and cooperative strategies. Even relatively low levels of hunting can potentially affect populations already stressed by environmental change. This argument also appears persuasive, yet evidence for extensive mammoth hunting varies from region to region. Neither explanation completely solves the puzzle. As a result, many scholars conclude that extinction likely emerges from a combination of factors rather than a single cause. Habitat loss weakens populations. Human hunting adds additional pressure. Environmental instability increases vulnerability. Together, these influences prove difficult for some species to survive. The same complexity appears in discussions of climate. For much of the 20th century, scientists often viewed climatic transitions as relatively gradual processes. New evidence reveals a more dynamic picture. Ice cores sediment records and other environmental archives demonstrate that temperatures can sometimes change surprisingly quickly. The Younger Dryas provides a dramatic example. A warming world suddenly experiences renewed cooling before warming resumes again. Such abrupt shifts challenge older assumptions about how climate systems behave. Why does the Younger Dryas occur? The leading explanation involves disruptions to ocean circulation caused by massive releases of fresh water from melting glaciers. Yet researchers continued debating details regarding timing mechanisms and regional effects. The evidence strongly supports large-scale environmental disruption. The precise sequence remains an active area of study. Then there are the more controversial ideas. From time to time, alternative hypotheses attract public attention. Some researchers have suggested that a comet or asteroid impact may contribute to environmental changes associated with the Younger Dryas. Proponents point to certain geological markers they interpret as evidence of a cosmic event. Most specialists remain unconvinced. The idea continues generating discussion, but it has not achieved broad scientific acceptance. The available evidence remains disputed, and many researchers argue that existing climatic explanations better account for observed patterns. This distinction is important. Scientific debate does not mean all explanations carry equal support. Some hypotheses are supported by substantial evidence. Others remain speculative. The strength of science lies not in eliminating disagreement but in testing ideas against evidence. The end of the Ice Age demonstrates this process repeatedly. New discoveries refine older interpretations. Unexpected findings challenge assumptions. Questions once considered settled sometimes reopen. The story continues evolving. Human migration presents another area of active investigation. Archaeological discoveries during recent decades have transformed understanding of when and how people move through various regions. Sites once thought impossible prove genuine. Migration timelines shift. New genetic evidence reveals previously unknown connections between populations. What survives in the record suggests remarkable complexity. Human movement does not follow a single path. Different groups respond differently to changing conditions. Some remain in familiar territories. Others expand into newly available landscapes. Still others adapt through changing technologies and social networks. The variety of responses reflects the diversity of environments emerging at the end of the Ice Age. No universal strategy exists. The same lesson appears again and again. Complex systems rarely produce simple outcomes. Perhaps this is why the end of the Ice Age continues captivating researchers and the public alike. It represents a moment when multiple transformations converge. Climate changes, ecosystems reorganize, geography shifts, human societies adapt. Each process influences the others. The result is a world undergoing profound transition, and yet despite decades of research, many details remain uncertain. The evidence remains incomplete. Entire coastal landscapes lie submerged beneath modern oceans. Countless archaeological sites have been destroyed or remain undiscovered. New technologies continue revealing information unavailable to earlier generations of scientists. The story is still being written. Every year brings new discoveries. Every discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. What emerges from all this investigation is not a neat, simple conclusion, but something more interesting. The end of the Ice Age is a reminder that history, climate, and human survival are deeply interconnected. Environmental change does not produce identical outcomes everywhere. Different communities experience the same global transformations in different ways. Some thrive, some struggle, some adapt quickly, others disappear. The people living through these events do not know they are participating in one of the most important transitions in human history. They are simply responding to the realities around them, yet their choices, movements, innovations, and resilience shape the future in ways they could never imagine. And as the debates continue, one conclusion grows increasingly clear. The generations who witness the final disappearance of the Ice Age are not merely survivors of a changing world. They are the bridge between two fundamentally different ages of human existence. The last generation born into the fading world of the Ice Age can never know how unique its place in history truly is. For them, life remains focused on immediate realities. Rivers must be crossed, food must be found, weather must be watched, children must be protected. The future extends perhaps a few seasons ahead, not thousands of years. Yet from the perspective of deep time, these people occupy one of the most extraordinary thresholds humanity has ever crossed. They're among the final witnesses of a world that had existed in one form or another for tens of thousands of years. Behind them lies the age of immense glaciers. Behind them lies the mammoth steppe. Behind them lie the exposed coastal plains now sinking beneath the sea. Behind them lies a planet shaped by ice. Ahead lies something entirely different. By the time the Younger Dryas ends and the climate enters the relatively stable conditions of the Holocene, many of the great transformations are already well underway. Temperatures rise rapidly, glaciers retreat farther north, forests continue spreading, rivers and lakes settle into new patterns, sea levels keep climbing. The Earth begins resembling the world known today. Not immediately, not perfectly, but unmistakably. The contrast between the height of the Ice Age and the early Holocene is profound. Entire ecosystems have changed. Vast regions have been transformed. Animal communities have been reorganized. Coastlines have shifted by hundreds of kilometers in some places. Perhaps most importantly, the environmental stability that follows creates conditions unlike those that existed during much of the preceding Ice Age. For thousands of years, the climate becomes comparatively predictable. This matters enormously. Human societies do not suddenly invent agriculture the moment the Ice Age ends. Many millennia still separate these hunter-gatherer communities from the first farms. Yet the foundations of that future are beginning to emerge. Stable climates encourage stable ecosystems. Stable ecosystems support more predictable resources. Predictable resources make new forms of human organization possible. The people living through the transition cannot see these long-term consequences, but they are helping create them. Every adaptation developed during the end of the Ice Age contributes to humanity's future success. Communities learn how to exploit diverse environments. They become skilled at managing uncertainty. They build social networks capable of spreading information across large distances. They refine technologies suited to changing conditions. The lessons learned during this period do not disappear. They become part of the human inheritance. In many ways, the first witnesses of the Ice Age's end are preparing humanity for everything that follows. Archaeology reveals hints of this transition everywhere. Sites dating to the early Holocene show people thriving in forests, wetlands, river valleys, and coastal regions. Technologies continue evolving. Diets remain diverse. Populations gradually expand into environments that were inaccessible or unsuitable during the height of glaciation. The pace differs from region to region. No single story applies everywhere. Yet a broader pattern remains visible. Humanity is adapting successfully to a transformed planet. This achievement is easy to overlook because modern people inherit the outcome. Forests, coastlines, rivers, and climates familiar today often feel normal and inevitable. They were neither. The world now taken for granted emerged from immense environmental upheaval. Every modern coastline reflects the legacy of rising seas. Every northern forest reflects the retreat of glaciers. Every landscape shaped by post-glacial rivers reflects processes set in motion thousands of years ago. The people who witnessed those transformations occupy a special place in human history precisely because they experienced change on such a vast scale. Most generations inherit a world broadly similar to the one known by their parents. These generations do not. They watch ancient patterns disappear. They encounter environments unknown to their ancestors. They move through landscapes being continuously reshaped by climate, water, vegetation, and time. The magnitude of that experience is difficult to overstate. Imagine seeing coastlines retreat throughout successive generations. Imagine hearing stories about lands now submerged beneath the sea. Imagine watching forests spread across territories once occupied by open plains. Imagine noticing that animals common in childhood become rare in old age. Such changes are not abstract. They are lived realities. And yet, despite the uncertainty humanity endures, that endurance may be the most important legacy of all. The end of the Ice Age is not a story of collapse. It is a story of adaptation. There are losses, certainly. Species disappear, landscapes vanish, ancient environments fade into memory. But there is also resilience. Human communities repeatedly adjust to new conditions. They learn, innovate, cooperate, and survive. Again and again they demonstrate qualities that will define the species for thousands of years to come. The glaciers retreat, the oceans rise, the forests advance, the mammoths disappear, humanity remains. The descendants of these Ice Age witnesses will eventually build villages, cultivate crops, raise monuments, establish kingdoms, and create civilizations. They will explore oceans, map continents, and develop sciences capable of reconstructing the very changes their ancestors lived through. But all of that lies in the future. For now the story belongs to the people standing at the edge of two worlds. The old world of ice is ending. The modern world is beginning. And the first humans to witness that transition leave behind traces scattered across riverbanks, buried beneath forests preserved in ancient sediments, and hidden beneath rising seas. Those traces tell a remarkable story. A story of climate and survival, of disappearance and renewal, of uncertainty and adaptation. A story written not in words but in landscapes. A story that continues shaping the world today. Word count 1176. The wind grows quieter. The great glaciers that once dominated continents continue their long retreat toward the distant north. Rivers settle into courses that will endure for thousands of years. Forests deepen across lands that were once open plains. The seas continue advancing, though more slowly now, covering the final remnants of ancient coastlines where generations once walked. The people who witnessed these transformations are gone. Their names are lost. Their voices have faded. Their stories survive only in fragments preserved beneath earth, ice, and water. Yet the landscapes around us still carry their legacy. A lake occupying a glacial basin, a valley carved by meltwater, a coastline shaped by rising seas, a forest growing where mammoths once roamed. These are reminders that the world has never been fixed. Even the most permanent features of the landscape are temporary when measured against the vast scales of time. The first witnesses of the Ice Age's end lived through one of the greatest transitions in human history without ever knowing its full significance. They adapt to shifting climates, changing ecosystems, and disappearing worlds because adaptation is what human beings do. Generation after generation they move forward, not because they understand the entire story, but because they learn enough to survive the next season, the next year, the next challenge. In that quiet persistence lies something extraordinary. The ancient world of ice disappears. A new world emerges, and between those two worlds stand ordinary people following rivers, watching animals, raising families, and navigating changes larger than themselves. Their footprints are gone. The camps have vanished. The coastlines have drowned. Yet their success remains visible everywhere. The modern world is built upon the foundations of the world they helped survive. And as the last light fades over the retreating glaciers of prehistory, the story resolves not with catastrophe, but with continuity. The ice withdraws, the forests spread, the seas rise, humanity endures, and across the vast landscape of time, the memory of that transformation remains written in the earth itself, waiting patiently for those who choose to look closely enough to see it.